Hasn't changed. Hasn't gone anywhere. If the experience of vulnerability is not natural to you and is not real, you are free. You are free to abandon it at any moment you choose. You are utterly free not to set into motion any further the dynamics that cause you to feel vulnerable, because you have the choice. And you also have at least the intellectual awareness, because I've been sharing it with you. You have at the least an intellectual awareness that you aren't what you thought you were, that you really are the Christ, that you really are, at this instant, nothing more and nothing less than God expressing Himself as you. So you have a justification for attempting to abandon the processes, the intellectual, mental processes that set into motion for you this invalid and unreal experience of vulnerability. This you that you ask God to fix up is pure fantasy. It can't be fixed because it doesn't exist. And waking up constitutes your abandoning the belief that you, as something on your own, have a will different from God's. We also talked about one other thing that I want to re-express, and that is that when you are convinced that you are an independent entity in your own right, and that it is your purpose to be this independent entity successfully and well, your prayers to God end up being prayers to help you be independently successful, responsible. But when you do, you are praying for something you do not want. If you could get God to say yes to that prayer, you would be getting God to put His stamp of approval, His agreement, His determination on the idea that you are different from Him, that you are independent. And at the bottom line, that means that you would get God's determination about you that you are an orphan and therefore permanently lost, because God's determination is an eternal determination. Thus, that kind of prayer will never get an answer. Some of you are beginning to get a feeble glimmer of the fact that no matter how hard you try, you just aren't making it as an independent entity. And I don't mean that you are getting the idea as a result of, quote, this lifetime, unquote, but a much longer experience of failure at not being able to determine your world and your life and yourself all by yourself. And that you have not been able to come anywhere close to succeeding at creating a presence out of whole cloth, out of nothing more than your pure imagination. You are beginning to have the experience of exhaustion. You are close to being willing to give up the ethic, like the prodigal son, and turn wearily for home. Wearily because you're exhausted from the effort to accomplish something that's impossible. It's finally beginning to sink in to you that maybe it is impossible. And that it's no longer a task worthy of your attention. Let's go to the book. The fact that God is love does not require belief, but it does require acceptance. Believing something doesn't make it true or real. The fact that it's real is what makes it real, whether you believe it or not. But for you to experience it, you have to be willing to accept the truth of it. You must let the truth penetrate your awareness by bringing no resistance to it. Continuing, it is indeed possible for you to deny facts, although it is impossible for you to change them. You see, you can deny that you're the Christ. You can just say, I'm a human being, and I'm struggling through my life. And my life is particularly difficult because my parents weren't highly educated, or they thought they were, but they had peculiar ideas, and therefore I ended up being taught things that were not useful to me, or they behaved toward me in a way that wasn't supportive of my developing a healthy sense of my self-worth. And as a result, I'm warped. I'm a twisted person, suffering through my adulthood because of their inarticulate way of raising me, their ignorant way of raising me. You see? And that's me. Twisted little poor me. Struggling. But you know what? They couldn't kill my determination. No, ma'am, they couldn't kill my determination. They couldn't get me down. And so, you know what? I'm overcoming my shortcomings with a vengeance. And that is the best choice of words. This is me, Raj, saying that is the best choice of words. Because one who is in that state of mind determines to be whole at the expense of those who sought to take their wholeness away by not illuminating it to them, by not treating them the way they expected to be treated, and on and on and on. If it's not parents, it's the political system, or it's the school system, or it's the medical institutions, something. Something has deprived that one from developing the best in themselves. And that's me, they say. That's me. And in one way or another, each of you is saying, that's me. You know, sure glad I have the Course, though. Because poor twisted me really needs it. Bullshit. There is no poor twisted you except in your imagination, but you exist and you need the Course. Why? Because you're twisted? No, because you're not twisted. Because you have not stopped, no matter what you've come to believe, being exactly what God is presencing Himself as right there where you are. The Course is like the truth, shining on you and uncovering what is real about you. So that what is unreal about you, which you have adopted and believed, can be seen for the fallacy it is, for the nothingness that it is, so that you stop acting as though it were true. And especially so that you stop acting as though it were true, because you have begun to realize that you don't have to do anything to earn what is true about you. You don't have to do anything to deserve what is true about you. But there is one thing you do have to do. You have to stop behaving as though it's not true about you. You have to stop acting out the old habit patterns, which are the way you get vengeance on your past. And I promise you that as long as you're trying to get vengeance on your past, or those whom you attribute to your problems to out of your past, you are confirming for yourself that you are a twisted victim now. You, on your own, are what you're asking God to do when you say to Him, help me be independent without all of this suffering. You are determining for yourself that you are indeed independent, that you do indeed have a will of your own, that you are exactly what you believe you are, and everyone and everything else is what you believe it is, and you're confirming it and locking yourself in to the very suffering that you do not want. Of course, in order to have what you want, which is the experience of peace, the experience of being the presence of love, the experience of invulnerability, the way in which you're going to get what you want, what you really want, is that you're going to have to let go of all of the determinations you have adopted as being true about you, which are not true at all, because they were never set in place in you. By that which is presencing himself right there where you are right this moment. Because God is not putting in you what he is not. Simply realize that you love what you've determined that you are. You have an attachment to it. But it's an attachment to something that isn't real. It's an attachment to something that God didn't put there. And the attachment itself to something that isn't there is something that God didn't place in you. Therefore, your addiction has no actual substance to it. And that's why you can be released from it instantaneously without withdrawals. Continuing. If you hold your hands over your eyes, you will not see, because you are interfering with the laws of seeing. If you deny love, you will not know it, because your cooperation is the law of its being. There is no love without you being the presence of love. It requires your cooperation. It requires your involvement. It requires you to let it into you so that it can spill over through you. If you don't let it in, you're blocking the function of your being. Or at least attempting to, and suffering in the attempt, because when you attempt to do the impossible, it never feels good. Continuing, you cannot change laws you did not make. You cannot change laws you did not make. And the laws of happiness were created for you, not by you. So much for, well, everyone creates his own reality. Everyone creates her own reality. No way. Reality was set into motion, not by you. And you have only one choice, and that is to cooperate with it. The human condition is the apparent result of not cooperating with the way things work. Continuing, attempts of any kind to deny what is are fearful. And if they are strong, your attempts of any kind to deny what is, if they are strong, they will induce panic. So it's like the degree to which, the degree of force that you bring to the movement of your fist into an immovable object will be exactly correlative to the amount of pain you will experience. To whatever degree you resist God, to whatever degree you deny your identity. To that degree, you will be having an uncomfortable experience, a suffering experience. Not because the wall is punishing you, not because the laws of God are punishing you, but because you are attempting to do something impossible, and whatever amount of force you bring to bear, whatever degree of determination you bring to bear upon the denial of what is, you will be that uncomfortable. Get this point, because then you'll stop blaming God, and because you know what's causing the discomfort, you will know what to attend to. You will know, oh, I'm going against the way things work. I'm trying to be what I cannot be. I had better find something else to do. Ah, now you're in the arena where a miracle can occur, a sudden shift of perception. And that's the key. Continuing, willing against reality, though impossible, can be made into a very persistent goal, even though you do not want it. Does everybody now understand what that means when it says, even though you do not want it? Again, it means that you do not want, ultimately, you do not want confirmation of your orphanhood. You do not want confirmation from the only thing that can give a true confirmation, which is God. You do not want confirmation that you are not connected with Him, not connected with your source. You do not want that. You think you want what you'll get in place of it. But what you'll get in place of it is something you have imagined, not something that is actually available to you to have. And until you know that, you won't give up. Until someone tells you that, you won't have justification for giving up the ethic, the quest for successful, righteous independence. Again, willing against reality, though impossible, can be made into a very persistent goal, even though you do not want it. But consider the result of this strange decision. You are devoting your mind to what you do not want. How real can this devotion be? If you do not want it, it was never created. If it was never created, it is nothing. Can you really devote yourself to nothing? Now that's the big question. Can you really devote yourself to nothing? Did God give you the capacity to devote yourself to nothing? No. Is your devotion to nothing valid? No. Can you then ever have, in actuality, devoted yourself to nothing? No. which means that all of this time that you have thought you were devoted to something, which was really nothing, hasn't been happening in actuality. Now, this is not an accurate, true illustration, but it gives you the idea. You're asleep on a grassy knoll in the middle of the kingdom of heaven, having a dream of devotion to something that's impossible. What's really happening? The Son of God is basking in the sun on a grassy knoll in the kingdom of heaven. The Christ. And while falling asleep and having a dream, a fantasy passed by. But the fantasy didn't happen. The Christ resting in the sun was what was happening the whole time. You see? So, all of this time that you think you have spent refining your soul, all this time that you have spent trying to be a successful, independent entity, has also been part of the fantasy. The span of time, all of these years and centuries of committed effort that you have put into it, is a fantasy as well. There is no time that has occurred. You've all had the experience of having a full-blown idea instantaneously, which has taken you a half an hour to share with someone else when you put it into words. Well, in the same way, your dream of years and years of committed effort was a moment, a flash. Well, what's the cost to you to have to give up those years of determined effort to be a responsible, respectable entity that others ought to respect because of your commitment? Commitment of a fraction of a second? What are you giving up? Nothing. But you see, you believe it's something. You've got the story worked out in your mind. You've lived out the story in your mind, not in actuality, but in your mind. And you believe the whole thing. And then you believe that to give up that whole thing is a great sacrifice instead of an instantaneous flash of a thought or a fantasy that didn't actually happen. Because what actually happened was that you didn't for a moment stop being the Christ, the fully Christed Son of God, resting on a grassy knoll in the sun in the middle of the kingdom of heaven. You see? Now, everything that I have said here could be called an allegory. I do not want you to take specifics of the grassy knoll and the sunshine and the Christ lying on the grassy knoll, but you've got the picture. You've got the reason that I used that illustration. Can you really devote yourself to nothing? Only in your dreams. Only in your dreams. Therefore you never have. Therefore you have not set yourself up for a penalty. When you wake up from the dream, you will not have a penalty to pay for having had the dream. You were paying the penalty while you were having the dream. And it was part and parcel of the dream. You know, the pain is the equivalent of the force you bring to bear upon doing the impossible. That's the penalty But the pain was always the equivalent of the amount of personal force, willfulness that you were bringing into play, attempting to do what can't be done. So, what's this with being bad little girls and bad little boys who didn't listen to their father or their mother and who deserves every bit of suffering they get? You see, that's part of the dream too. Well, I better not wake up, because if I wake up, then I'll really have to pay. No, when you wake up, you know the truth. And you know the dream wasn't the truth. And the dream and the content of it never happened, except as a figment of the imagination. Continuing, God, in His devotion to you, created you devoted to everything, and gave you what you are devoted to. Like I said last week, how could you have a devotion to something that God doesn't have a devotion to? How could you think that you have a function different from God's? And God's function is to see everything that He has made and recognize Himself in it. That's your function, to look at everything that God has made and recognize God in it. And in being willing to recognize God in it instead of yourself, you will find yourself in it. Because you're not separate. The mind of God is a singularity, and there is no other mind for you to experience but that mind. If you are conscious, you are mind, and there is only one mind. That's what gets uncovered when the truth shines on you. When the light of truth illuminates you, it illuminates God to you as you. And seeing as God sees and being as God bees becomes your unavoidable conscious function. God, in His devotion to you, created you devoted to everything, and gave you what you are devoted to. Gave you everything. Otherwise, you would not have been created perfect. Reality is everything. And therefore you have everything because you are real. Now, that implies, doesn't it, that everything that is real includes everything that is real. Did you realize you are part of the infinitude of the top of that petal, the third from the left on that poinsettia, and every other petal and leaf, and the pottery pot? You're some part of the infinitude of that idea. You are essential to that poinsettia, just as it is essential to you. Reality is everything, and therefore you have everything because you are real. And the poinsettia petal has everything because it is real. You cannot make the unreal because the absence of reality is fearful, and fear cannot be created. As long as you believe that fear is possible, you will not create. How would you create? By letting yourself be the presence of the movement of that which is creation, which means you would have to yield your independent, autonomous authority to the movement of creation that is already in movement. As long as you believe that fear is possible, you will not create. Well, another reason is that as long as you believe that fear is possible, you're still holding yourself separate from your source, and you don't know who you are. You don't know what you are. And that, as I said, is always an uncomfortable situation. Why is it uncomfortable? Because your irrevocable sanity is telling you, you're out of your mind, you're out of your mind, get back in your mind, get back in your mind, become singular again. Stop trying to be what you aren't, be what you are. Come on back home. Again, as long as you believe that fear is possible, you will not create. Creation requires defenselessness from you. Because you can't let anything in or through if you are defended. Continuing, opposing orders of reality make reality meaningless. And reality is meaning. Now, can it actually make reality meaningless? No. But it will make it meaningless to you because you'll withdraw yourself from recognizing what it really is. And why will you withdraw yourself from recognizing what it really is? Because you've chosen to try to be something on your own separate from your source. And that still has value for you. Even though it's an unreal experience that is happening only in the imagination and only in a fraction of a second. It's been a long second, right? A long fraction of a second. But if you understand, get the idea that it is only a fraction of a second, and you'll realize how little there is to be undone. You see, it's not a big job that has to be done here. Just an unjustifiable abandonment of a commitment. You see? That's all. Continuing, remember then that God's will is already possible and nothing else will ever be. God's will is not only already possible, it's the only thing in place. It's the only thing in play. It's all you get. The only reason that we would say that it's already possible is to counteract your belief that it's not. To implant in your mind that in spite of what you believe, it's already possible. God's will is already possible. And I carry it further and say it's already possible because it's the only thing in place. It's the only thing in play. This is the simple acceptance of reality because only this is real. You cannot distort reality and know what it is. And there you have the description of how the human condition came into play, or seemed to. You cannot distort reality and know what it is. And the human condition, the material world and universe, a mortal body, sin, sickness, and death are nothing more than a distortion of reality. It's not a new world, it's not a new universe, it's not a different dimension. It's just a distortion of what already is and what only can be. Willfulness, as I've described before, is like if you have a frame that you have nailed a piece of latex to. Willfulness is pushing your fist through the latex or your face through the latex, distorting the flatness of the latex so that it seems to have the configuration of whatever you've pushed through it or against it. It can't be torn, it can't be broken. So the further you try to push yourself through the latex, the more resistance it's going to give, the more energy it's going to take, and you're going to say, "Phew, this is hard work. I am getting a lot of resistance from this. It's not yielding to me very well. It must be against me." The sheer projection. I must be against it. I must really be pushing hard against it. I must be trying to do something that ultimately can't be done, which is to push my way all the way through it. You cannot distort reality and know what it is. And if you do distort reality, you will experience anxiety, depression, and ultimately panic, because you are trying to make yourself unreal. You're trying to make yourself stop being the Christ and be a puppet without strings. A Pinocchio. You see? I promise you that's not what you want. When you feel these things, anxiety, depression, and ultimately panic, do not try to look beyond yourself for truth can only be within you. Say, therefore, Christ is in me, and where he is, God must be. For Christ is part of him, God. It's a prayer. It's an acknowledgement of the truth that I've been sharing with you, which at the moment seems more like theory than truth, or a possibility than truth. But it is the truth, and that's where you must start if you're going to see healing. You must start with the truth about you. You must invite that truth in, because even if it's just a little ray of the light of truth shining upon you, it has a power of illumination that goes way beyond the little bit that you let in. But start there. Christ is in me, and where he is, God must be, for Christ is part of him. What is this? This is the way you begin to acknowledge truth about yourself that goes beyond the definition you've been employing for so long. You don't ask truth to shine on the wretched, confused, awful mess that you've come to believe that you are. You ask the truth to shine on the truth in you. You're not here to fix up the mess, because the mess is part of this flash of an instantaneous fantasy, you see. And you want the light of truth to shine on the Christ on the grassy knoll in the middle of the kingdom of heaven with such warmth, we'll say, that it causes you to stir from your dream and notice yourself, the one you are, at home, where you belong, consciously embracing it and yourself for what it and you are. That's what you want. We're not here to fix anything up. This acknowledgement, Christ is in me, and where He is, I'll just throw this in for extras, I am in you. I am with you. This doesn't mean the Christ is in me, whatever the Christ might be. I know it's something holy, and it's in me, it's with me. No, the Christ is me. The Christ is the conscious Son of God. The Christ is the conscious daughter of God. And the Christ is with you. Each one of you, right now. This statement is a statement of fact. Christ is in you. And where He is, God must be, for Christ is part of Him. This is the bridge away from the fixer-upper mentality. You get it? You are neither behind the point of perfection nor advancing toward it. You are at that point and must understand yourself therefrom. You see? That's what we're talking about. It's the acceptance of that fact that serves as a bridge out of something that is not and never has been anything more than an instantaneous fantasy, even though it seems to have enveloped great passage of time, great continuity of effort and discipline on your part that you thought would make you worthy of respect and dignity and truly autonomous entityhood, if I may put it that way. The next section is called the answer to prayer. Everyone who has ever tried to use prayer to request something has experienced what appears to be failure. This is not only true in connection with specific things, which might be harmful, but also in connection with requests which are strictly in line with this course. The latter, in particular, might be incorrectly interpreted as proof that the course does not mean what it says. You must remember, however, that the Course does state, and repeatedly, that its purpose is the escape from fear. Let us suppose then that what you request of the Holy Spirit is what you really want, but you are still afraid of it. As I've said before, Paul really does want to wake up. But he is afraid of yielding up his special uniqueness. Not meaning what he's doing right now, but just special uniqueness that makes him different from everyone else, and therefore, part of the infinite expression of God that has to be unique. And therefore, if he gives up that which he perceives to cause him to be unique, it will cause him to sort of blend into the whole and lose identity. And so he's afraid to let himself into the unknown. Let us suppose, then, that what you request of the Holy Spirit is what you really want, but you are still afraid of it. Should this be the case, your attainment of it would no longer be what you want, even if it is. Should this be the case, that you're afraid of it, your attainment of it would no longer be what you want, because you don't want what you're afraid of, even if what you want is what you want. Even if waking up is what you want, you won't get it if you're afraid of it. That's what it's saying. This accounts for why certain specific forms of healing are not achieved, even though the state of healing is. It frequently happens that an individual asks for physical healing because he is fearful of bodily harm. At the same time, however, if he were healed physically, the threat to his thought system would be considerably more fearful to him than its physical expression. Suppose that you seemed to have been born deformed or with an infirmity, and you've lived with it for your whole life, and someone comes along and says, healing is possible. If there's dissatisfaction with the experience of limitation, the immediate overwhelming response would be, oh, thank God, I can't wait to get out of this wheelchair. Or I can't wait to get out of this bed that I've been in. And it's a genuine, true feeling. But the minute that one gets out of the wheelchair, oh, nobody's going to want to help him. No one's going to take care of him. Oh, he'll have to get a job. He'll have to find a purpose. So much responsibility will come that was never there before. God, I don't know if I could take that. I don't want to be here, but I've already lost so much ground. I mean, after all, here I am 35 years old. Everyone else 35 years old has gone way ahead of me. I can't possibly make up the difference. I can't possibly become trained. I can't possibly change into a frame of mind where I feel competent and equal to everything else. And besides, you know, the loving support of everyone around me that I've received all these years, I know that's got to be of God. I know it's been real. I don't want to give that up. People wouldn't love me like that anymore. They wouldn't love me if I didn't become responsible, self-responsible, if I didn't start taking care of myself. And then they'd say, hey, get on the stick and take care of yourself. We can't take care of you forever. Now you can get up and move around. You're as capable as everyone else. You see? Now that's fearsome. After 35 years of constant willing attentiveness that's been received, you see? So you think you want something, but getting it can be a fearful thing. So understand how that can be. At the same time, however, if he were healed physically, the threat to his thought system would be considerably more fearful to him than its physical expression. In this case, he is not really asking for release from fear, but for the removal of a symptom which he has selected. This request is therefore not for healing at all. See, I want to be relieved of this particular suffering, of being confined to my wheelchair, let's say. But I don't want to be relieved of all the help I've been getting. I don't want to be relieved of not having to be self-responsible, you see. Just this one little thing I want to be relieved of. So it's not a request for healing at all. It's a request for a relief from a particular form of suffering. And not relief from not being able to do all the things that the suffering has kept him from being able to do. Continuing, the Bible emphasizes that all prayers are answered, and this must be true if no effort is wasted. It's a law of being that effort cannot be wasted. Effort is always maximally effective. The very fact that one has asked the Holy Spirit for anything will ensure a response. Now this applies equally to your guide. When you ask something of your guide, whether you hear the response or not, there is always a response. The very fact that one has asked the Holy Spirit for anything will ensure a response. Yet it is equally certain that no response given by the Holy Spirit will ever be one which would increase fear. It is possible that his answer will not be heard at all. It is impossible, however, that it will be lost. There are many answers which you have already received, but have not yet heard. That's like at Christmas. There are many gifts you have been given, but some of them you haven't opened yet. I assure you that they are waiting for you. It is indeed true that no effort is wasted. Now, it's likewise true that any gift of love that any of you have extended to a brother or sister, whether it was received or not, whether it was opened or not, has been put under their Christmas tree, as it were. It is in their presence and will remain in their presence, no matter how completely they ignore it. It cannot be gotten out of their presence. And it remains there for them to notice and open until they notice and open it. When you, any of you, make an extension of love out of the infilling and overflowing of the movement of love from the Father through you, because you dare to care enough to not react with judgment, but to be willing to recognize the truth in them and let them be the object of your affection, and thereby allowing this movement of love through you, that love extended has hit its mark and will remain there until it's let in. This is foundational fact. You can't get any more basically factual than that. It is the truth, no matter what you believe about it. And I am telling you this so that you might understand that any expression of love that you have participated in the flow of has not been futile. And its healing effect, like a dormant seed, simply awaits a little attention, a little moisture to germinate and grow and bless. I want to come back to this prayer because we're going to end here for tonight. Up until this section, the answer to prayer, for the last couple of weeks, our attention has been on you. The course's attention has been on the truth about you. And we ended up with this bridge out of the fixer-upper mentality. Christ is in me, and where He is, God must be, which would have to mean in you, for Christ is part of Him. Now, if this is the bridge out of the illusion of a fixer-upper mentality and all that goes along with it, if this is the bridge out of it for you, it's the bridge out of it for your brother. If this is what you must be willing to acknowledge about yourself in order to wake up, It is what you must be willing to acknowledge about your brother in order for you to have the vision that helps him to wake up. Now, your brother's behavior may not exhibit this knowledge or this fact at all. Are you going to go according to your interpretation of your brother, developed during this expansive period of time that has passed in which you have been diligent and demonstrating respectability, and the passage of time is that which gives proof to your committedness and your stability and blah, 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 that all is a fraction of a second of imagination, you know. Are you going to look at your brother and believe beliefs that have been acquired by you during this long fraction of a second, and believe your beliefs? Or are you going to look at your brother, no matter what the behavior seems to be exhibiting, with a willingness to say, Christ is in her. Christ is in him. And where he, the Christ, is, God must be. For Christ is part of God. Christ is part of him. The bridge out of the fixer-upper mentality, in which condemnation, judgment, justice, penalty are all elemental parts. The bridge out of that depends upon your not trying to function in the fixer-upper mentality. If you're going to abandon it for yourself, you've got to be willing to abandon it for your sister or your brother. You're abandoning it for yourself while you're still being assholes to one degree or another. Right at this moment, there's no judgment there. You're just not awake yet, and so therefore you are behaving ignorantly because you believe what you believe instead of the truth. And so everyone requires this bridge out of the fixer-upper mentality. And if it's your salvation, it's your sisters and brothers' salvation. If it's your salvation, your extension of love has to involve providing that bridge in your mind out of what their behavior is expressing, so that you can move to the point where you're willing to see Christ is in her, and where he is, God must be, for Christ is part of him. And it's not, wow, where Christ is, God must be. God must be in you. You hear me? God, Christ must be in you. Get it? If not, got it? If not, get it. Do you hear me? No. No. You don't impress the truth upon them. You don't coerce them into the truth. You don't know the truth to make something happen. The truth is what already is. And everything else is part of this humongous epic of instantaneous proportions. Nothing that you believe is something humongous. Now I want to end here because it sets the stage for next week. And for once I'm going to ask each of you to read the next 3 or 4 pages before you come next week. because it's going to be a meat and potatoes session. Which means it's going to be very nutritious. Starting where to begin to read. With the paragraph, if you would know your prayers are answered, never doubt a Son of God. Right where we ended. Read to the end of the chapter, 2.5 pages. Okay. It's such a pleasure to be in the light that illuminates what is true about you. I love you all, and I look forward to being with you next week.